Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Ruvain speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 10th day of the month of Nisan 5781. It is the 23rd day of March 2021. Springtime. Springtime in Israel, springtime around the world. Springtime means Pesach, Passover. This coming Shabbat, we read Parshat Tzav, which is the second parsha, second Torah reading of the book of Vayikra. Leviticus begins in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1, concludes chapter 8, verse 36. And this coming Shabbat is also Erev Pesach. It's also Passover Eve. Passover begins Motzei Shabbat. That is, Passover begins at the conclusion of Shabbat. So it's a very complex situation when we have Passover that begins at the conclusion of Shabbat. It means we have to be ready for Passover already before Shabbat. We have to have everything completely kosher kosher for Pesach. We have to have rid our houses of chametz, of all leaven, before Shabbat, which is actually 2 days then before Passover itself. Yet on Shabbat, we need to have chalot with our meals. We need to have a challah, which is a loaf of bread. We can't replace it with matzah because we're not to eat matzah before Passover, so as to have a fresh taste and desire for the matzah. And so we have to be completely ready for Passover, meaning everything, our houses, our kitchens, our table, our cutlery, our dishes, everything. Yet we have to have challah at least in the evening and in the afternoon meal, which is chametz, which is leaven. So what do we do? So many of us will be eating on paper plates, plastic cutlery, eating outside if we can, because we don't even want a crumb to fall in the house. So we have to be very careful and pay attention and be ready. And then Motzei Shabbat, at the conclusion of Shabbat already, is the Seder, the Passover meal, the famed Passover meal in which we read and discuss the Haggadah. Haggadah literally means telling the story of Passover, because, as we know, we're commanded in Torah to teach our children about the Exodus, about what Hashem did for us, what Hashem did to the Egyptians, how Hashem delivered us from bondage and brought us out of Egypt in order to give us Torah, in order to bring us into the land of Israel, in order that we would build a mikdash, a place for Hashem to dwell amongst his people. So we're real busy here in Israel right now. It gets real hectic in the weeks and days leading up to Passover. And full disclosure, I have to tell you that I'm actually recording this on Monday the 9th of Nisan, Monday the 22nd of March. Tomorrow, Tuesday, here in Israel, is Election Day, our fourth in less than 2 years. Election Day for the parliament, for the government of Israel. As many of you know, it's been a real stalemate in Israel for these past 4 elections. There hasn't been a real decision. It's always been a balance. We have parliamentary government here, meaning that there are a number of parties that run, and the party usually with the largest mandate, with the most seats in the parliament, gets the call to form a government by making deals with other parties in order to get a majority. There are 120 members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and you need at least 61 to have a very slim majority. Of course, that's not a very steady, stable government, but you need at least that much. And This past 4 elections, nobody's really been able to get it. This past election, Netanyahu cobbled together a government with a party, one of the parties that had sworn they would never be in a government with Netanyahu. So even though they compromised and formed a government together, it was not a very effective government, to say the least. It did not last long. It was riven with conflict and arguments and lack of decision, etc., etc. So here we are. Actually, this is the fourth election in less than 2 years. And so on election day here in Israel, people have the day off to encourage people to actually go and vote. Now, usually we have a pretty high turnout in Israel, but of course, by the time the fourth time comes around in less than 2 years, a lot of people are discouraged, they're disinterested. But I truly hope that the turnout is good. We need to have a government. We need to have a stable government. I know which side of the political divide I will be voting for. There are, I think, about 12 parties, maybe more. I think more running in this election. So you have a big choice. And when you have such a large choice and you have certain parties who are on the right block and certain parties in the left block and certain parties who are sort of in the middle, you vote not just necessarily for the candidate or the list of candidates of your choice, because you vote for a party, not an individual, but you also have to strategize. You know, you want a certain side to form a government. You want a right-wing government or you want a left-wing government. So it's a bit of a game, a bit of a crapshoot, but we're at it again, and so I decided that I would record today, a day early, and here from Jerusalem. Tomorrow I'll be home, I'll go to vote, and then I will dedicate much of my day toward getting ready for Passover, which is an exhausting process. So by the time you actually sit down at your Seder, you're usually pretty worn out. But this year, since Shabbat precedes the Seder, we'll actually be able to rest. And not only that, I know that in many countries, I know the United States, changed your clock about 2 weeks ago. We are changing our clock on Friday morning, meaning Shabbat will come in about an hour later than it did the week before, which is going to be about 6:30-ish. And so it's going to be fairly late in the evening when we actually sit down for our Seder on Saturday evening. And of course, there are many requirements, food requirements at the Seder. And one of the main requirements, in fact, the most important requirements, which we all likelihood will not be performing, not be partaking of this Passover, as has been the case for many Passovers for the past 2,000 years, is the Korban Pesach, the Passover lamb, the Passover offering, which is the main aspect of Passover, the Passover Seder. And of course, we, in recent weeks, read twice the relevant verses in which Israel is commanded to perform the Passover offering. We read it in Parshat Bo a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, and a couple of weeks ago we read it again, Shabbat HaChodesh. I guess that was 2 weeks ago, because this is the same section in Torah which both talks about declaring the new moon and the Passover offering. So let's just look at it one more time from the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 1. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be to you the head of the months. To you it shall be the first of the month of the year. Speak to the entire community of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, let each one take a lamb for each parental home, a lamb for each household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor who is nearest to his house shall take one according to the number of people, each one according to one's ability to eat, and shall you be counted for the lamb. You shall have a perfect male lamb in its first year. You may take it either from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it for inspection until the 14th day this month, and the entire congregation of the community of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. And they shall take some of the blood and put it in the 2 doorposts and on the lintel, on the houses in which they will eat it. And on this night they shall eat the flesh roasted over the fire, and unleavened cakes with bitter herbs they shall eat it. You shall not eat it rare or boiled in water, except roasted over the fire, its head with its legs and with its innards. And ye shall not leave over any of it until morning, and whatever is left over until morning you shall burn in the fire. And this is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is a Passover offering for Hashem. I will pass through the land of Egypt on this night, and I will smite every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and upon all the gods of Egypt will I wreak judgment. I, Hashem. And the blood will be for you a sign upon the house where you will be. And I will see the blood and skip over you, and there will be no plague to destroy you when I smite the people of the land of Egypt. And this day shall be for you as a memorial, and you shall celebrate it as a festival for Hashem. Throughout your generations you shall celebrate it as an everlasting statute. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened cakes, matzot. But on the preceding day you shall clear away all leaven from your houses, for whoever eats leaven from the 1st until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And on the 1st day there shall be a holy convocation. On the 7th day you shall have a holy convocation. No work may be permitted on them, but what is eaten by any soul, that alone may be performed for you. And so on and so forth. So this is the basis of Passover. This is the basis of the Passover Seder, the festive meal that we have on the first night of Passover. This is the basis of the 1st and 7th day of Passover, which are holidays, days in which we don't do work other than preparation of the food that we're eating on those days, which is makes it different than a Shabbat rest day. Because on Shabbat we don't prepare any food. We prepare all the food in advance. This particular Passover coming on Motzei Shabbat, and the conclusion of Shabbat, of course, things will need to be prepared in advance. But the one thing we won't be having this year, unless there is a sudden change in our reality, is the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, which, as I said, is the main aspect of the Passover observance. And here in Egypt, as we read, they were told on the 10th day of the month to get for themselves, acquire a lamb. Now the 10th day is today, election day here in Israel. It's the 10th day of Nisan. And they were to keep it in Egypt, in their houses, watch over it. And on the 14th day, slaughter it in the afternoon. And in the time of the Mikdash, in the time of the Holy Temple, the lambs would be brought to the Temple Mount, brought to the Holy Temple by the pilgrims who came from all over the country to make it to Jerusalem for Passover. And they would bring their lamb and take turns, shifts, into entering into the inner courtyard of the Holy Temple, and there slaughter the lamb. And once the lamb was slaughtered, the blood would be caught into a mizrak, which was either a gold or a silver bowl with a handle, which then would be taken by a kohen, a priest, and brought. So it was like a bucket brigade. There was a line of kohanim between each of the groups doing their offering that stretched from the actual slaughter of the lamb to the altar, and they would pass this mizrak, this bucket of blood, hand to hand till it got to the altar, and then pour it on the altar because the blood needed to be dashed upon the altar. Then, once the lamb was slaughtered, the pilgrim would take it back off the Temple Mount and into Jerusalem, and everybody would eat their lamb in Jerusalem. Everyone from all over. Jerusalem became an open city. People who lived in Jerusalem opened up their houses and their courtyards for visitors to sleep and to eat. Ovens were set up. Special ovens were set up in the courtyards all throughout Jerusalem, and the lambs were roasted, as we read. They were roasted in an oven, but over a flame. So, as I said, it couldn't be boiled. It couldn't be baked. It had to be roasted in a very specific way, whole. And actually, it was put on a spit. The spit was made out of pomegranate branch, because pomegranate branch is very moist, and it wouldn't catch fire as the lamb was cooking. And once the lamb was ready, it would be eaten. Now, again, on a normal Passover, you get back from the Temple Mount in the afternoon, and you have a little more time to set up your oven and prepare and roast the lamb. When it actually happened on the end of Shabbat, makes it much. First of all, there was you could still slaughter the animal in the Temple Mount on Shabbat. You couldn't carry a knife separately on Shabbat. So what they would do in temple times is take the knife for the slaughter and actually bury it in the wool of the lamb. The lamb, in effect, would be carrying it to the Temple Mount. But once you're done and you bring it back, you have to wait till the end of Shabbat before you can begin to prepare it. So I guess you take your time and eat slowly. And the lamb, even though it's an essential part of the Seder, and everyone has to have some lamb, everyone has to partake of it, it's not the only thing that you eat. There's also another offering called a Haggadah, which would be a cow, and that could also be eaten. And of course, you have the special foods, the bitter herbs, to remind us of the bitterness of our servitude in Egypt, and the charoset, which is a delicious spread of. There's different ways of making it. The kind I like is made with dates and nuts and all sorts of seasoning. It's absolutely delicious. You spread it on the matzah. Beautiful. And all other requirements, things that we eat in the Seder to represent different aspects of the servitude and of the redemption and of the whole process. We're telling a story. And everyone needs to tell a story. We tell a story to our children. And even if you know the story, and even if everybody knows the story, it still tell the story. The mitzvah, the commandment, is to tell the story. And we tell a story in first person, not like, oh, this is what happened a long time ago to our ancestors. You tell it, this is what happened to me. We have to relive it. Just telling it isn't enough. We have to relive it. We have to feel ourselves leaving Egypt every year. We have to taste with the food that we're eating, the taste of freedom, and with the bitter herbs, the taste of oppression. We have to internalize it physically and emotionally and intellectually and spiritually. And we have to understand that we're leaving servitude, we're leaving slavery, and we're going to freedom, and that it's Hashem who is taking us out of Egypt and delivering us. It mentions in what we read earlier that the people in Egypt, the Jews in Egypt, they were instructed to be fully dressed, to wear your shoes, to be ready to go on the road as soon as you finish your meal. And many people have a tradition today of also, dressing as if they were going to go on a long journey in order to reenact and get that feeling. On the other hand, we're also instructed that we incline to our left as we eat the meal. It's a commandment. It's essential part of the Seder, to incline to the left, to lean to our left, because that was the custom at the time. Actually, I believe it was a Roman custom. The well-to-do people, the aristocrats, they would dine leaning to the left. It was a gesture of expressing freedom, and so we're supposed to feel free. We're supposed to act as free people, b'nei chorin, at the Passover Seder. So there's a lot going on, and to this day, of course, matzah is also a very essential part of the Seder, and of course the entire 7 days of Passover. We only eat matzah, and absolutely no leaven to anything. And of course, the tradition of eating matzah has not been interrupted in these past 2,000 years. And we eat lots and lots of matzah. And the matzah on the Seder night symbolizes all sorts of things that we discuss on the Seder. It's a beautiful, beautiful meal, a beautiful ceremony, and it's beloved because not only does it bring families together and friends together, but it's all about sharing the experience. It's all about talking and teaching and asking questions and giving answers, traditional answers, coming up with new answers, with new questions. We're given a lot of freedom to talk about our freedom. We're given a lot of freedom to try to understand and to try to put ourselves in the place of one who is actually leaving slavery and stepping into freedom. So it's a very, very, very dynamic evening. And of course, the food is out of this world delicious. And it goes on till late. We have the Afikomin, which is a piece of one of the matzahs. We call it the Afikomin, which I believe means dessert. And it actually symbolizes the Korban Pesach. It symbolizes the Passover offering, which everyone has to have a bit of, a morsel of the Passover offering when there's a Passover offering. When there's not, we replace it, as it were, with a piece of the matzah. And that has to be eaten before midnight, as we learn in what we just read, that the Passover lamb has to be eaten before midnight. Now, we also read that if there were not too many people in the household, you get together with your neighbor so that you can finish the lamb. Now, in reality, what happened is that you had large groups of people eating together, doing the Passover Seder together. And before people left their towns, they would form groups or be assigned to a group. Everybody, rich, poor, people with families, people without families. It, of course, is a sacred tradition on Passover to invite people over. People invite strangers. People invite lone soldiers. People invite elderly people. People invite people who have no family to their Seder to be together. And this idea of aminui, that you need to be in a group. Nobody should do Passover alone. And as it said in what we read, it was the beginning of this tradition that you get together with other people, because no one's expected to eat an entire lamb by themselves. And in fact, you might have 50 people in a group eating, having a Seder together, or even more, in which case the morsel of lamb is going to be very, very small, because a lamb is not a large animal. There's not a whole lot of meat on it. You're obligated to eat a minimal amount, but beyond that minimal amount, there is no obligation. But everybody needs to have a piece of that lamb. Also, there is the very, very beloved tradition of the 4 cups of wine that have all sorts of symbolism. They represent the 4 exiles that Israel has been throughout her history. And of course, with each glass of wine, which needs to be drunk at particular parts throughout the telling of the Haggadah, we get a little more intoxicated, which just makes the whole thing a little more challenging and maybe a little more lively, a little more fun. But it is an integral part of the Passover Seder. People who shouldn't have wine or can have wine or simply don't want to have wine or don't want to have that much wine can replace it with grape juice if they like. And of course, then there is a fifth cup of wine that we pour, that is for Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, who at a certain point in the Seder, we actually open the door to invite Elijah the prophet in. Elijah is a harbinger of the Messiah. He will come at the end of days with the Messiah, delivering the Messiah, as it were. And so in this spirit of redemption, and of course, the tradition is that the month of Nisan, which is the month of our exodus from Egypt, will also be the month of our final redemption. That Eliyahu will be escorting the Messiah. So we all invite Eliyahu. He should come. It's an opportune time to come and join us. And we actually pour a fifth cup of wine, fill it to the brim, and leave it there for Eliyahu. And the next morning, we see if it's still full, if it's half full, if it's been knocked over and spilled. You never know what might happen. There's so many aspects, so many details and beautiful stories and beautiful angles to the Passover Haggadah. There's the traditional Haggadah. Then there are people in modern time now. There's lots of different versions, as it were, but the traditional Haggadah is thousands of years old. It was formulated by our sages, and our sages actually appear in the Haggadah. There are many stories about our different sages, our different rabbanim, our rabbis, in this time, in that time, telling this story in that detail, discussing the Exodus. And we sing a lot of songs. We sing the beautiful song Dayenu, which is many, many verses. And Dayenu means that would be enough. So we start, if God had simply delivered us out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If God had delivered us out of Egypt, but hadn't opened up the Sea of Reeds, that would have been enough. If God had delivered us, opened up the Sea of Reeds, but hadn't brought us to Mount Sinai, that would have been enough, etc., etc., etc. The final verse is, if God hadn't brought us into the land of Israel and established the Holy Temple, that would have been enough. Of course, the irony is, it never would have been enough. We want to go all the way into the land of Israel, receive Torah into the land of Israel, build a Holy Temple. But the point is gratitude. The festival of Passover is a festival of gratitude, of thanks. And that is why the only day throughout the year that we sing Hallel. Hallel is a series of psalms of thanks and of praise for Hashem that we sing on holidays. We sing in the morning, part of the morning service. Only on Passover, on the night of Passover, in the Beit Knesset, in the synagogue, before the Seder, do we sing Hallel. And as part of the Seder itself, we also sing Hallel. And again, the next morning we sing Hallel. And then we also sing Hallel every morning throughout the entire 7 days of Passover. Now, this year, the 7th day is going to fall on Shabbat. Since the first day started Motzei Shabbat, Saturday evening, the 7th day is actually going to be in the same day as Shabbat, which again makes it a little bit more challenging. The 7th day is actually the day that Israel crossed the Sea of Reeds. So the 7th day of Passover has its own theme of gratitude and theme of redemption. part and parcel, of course, of the entire Exodus, but also standalone, as it were. And here in Israel, of course, this year is a little bit different. We are still in the era of Corona, even though Israel is thankfully emerging from all the lockdowns and all the limitations, and things are really opening up here. I imagine, however, things like Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, which usually takes place usually on the first day of the intermediary days of Passover at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and usually attracts tens of thousands of people. I'm sure this year it will be a limit as well as to the number of people who can attend, but it is just a happy time here in Israel. The weather is beautiful, although the end of this week, right before Passover, it's supposed to get very rainy and very cold. But that's springtime here in Israel. And of course, back in temple days, all the preparation would begin. As we had mentioned a month ago, in the beginning of the month of Adar, already the workers would be sent out from the Holy Temple to repair roads and bridges, to uncover graves that might have been covered by the winter rains and then trees falling, etc., because people have to arrive. In order to enter into the inner gates of the Holy Temple, you have to have a very top level of purity. That is, you have to have the purity that can only get with the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer. And so at this time, many people, when they arrived in Jerusalem, would be sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. And so for this reason, you wanted to avoid accidentally treading over any grave sites, because that would give you that tum'at met, that would give you that impurity through contact with a corpse. And so this is the reason why graves were cleared, so they're clearly marked, so people could avoid them. And of course, the machatzit shekel, the half shekel census, that was collected from the beginning of Adar for the purpose of funding the upcoming yearly public offerings. And Nisan is the first of our months. It's the first in the cycle of the holidays. So really the first holiday of the year is Passover. And even though Rosh Hashanah is the new year, it's not the first holiday of the year. We have Passover, and then we have Shavuot, which marks the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And then only a few months after that do we have Rosh Hashanah, which is actually the 7th month of the year that begins with Nisan. And now, you might have noticed I haven't really said anything about Parshat Tzav, which is this week's Torah reading. And it begins like this. And Hashem said to Moshe, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. This is the burnt offering which burns on the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar shall burn with it. This week's Parshat Tzav is all about a continuation of last week's Parsha, all about the offerings, different types of offerings. It goes into a lot of detail, and it's also about the preparations for the inauguration of the tabernacle, which we're going to be talking about again in the following week's Parsha, Shmini. There's a lot of information all about the offerings, and very fascinating, but I felt that this week we really needed to focus on Passover. I wish everybody, wherever you are, everyone, a very happy Passover. Freedom. It's all about freedom, and freedom is not simply leaving physical bondage, but it's also entering into a covenant with Hashem, entering into a relationship in which we serve Hashem. We don't serve human beings. Only Hashem is our master, and that is freedom. So I wish everybody a very, very happy Passover, Chag Sameach, Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a kosher Passover, and a healthy Passover for everyone. Thank you very much for being with me. Temple Talk.